For a long time, I truly believed that by the time a woman reaches her early 60s, the heart settles down the way linens are folded and put away in a high cupboard, still useful, still clean, but rarely taken out. I imagined feelings becoming tidy and muted. You become good at practical things, simmering soup without a recipe, remembering anniversaries, sending condolence cards without stumbling over what to say. I thought longing, or anything like it, thinned into something gentle and distant, like the faint memory of the wallpaper in your childhood bedroom, familiar, but no longer able to stir you. Before I unfold the rest of this night, take a second to hit like and subscribe. It really does help more than you know, and if you're drawn into stories like this, I want you here for every one of them. Also tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Are you in a small town where the evenings fall slow and gentle, or in a city where the lights never quite go dark? That was before Lucas started coming on Thursdays. Lucas is my daughter-in-law's younger brother. He's 34, I'm 62. He'd recently stepped out of a short, painful marriage that had lasted just long enough to leave a mark. My daughter-in-law, Jenna, was worried about him rattling around alone in a small apartment in the city. One afternoon she asked, almost casually, if he could spend some evenings at my house while he found his footing again. "You've got the extra room," she said, "and he's always liked you. It might do him good not to go home to an empty place. Since my husband, Robert, died, the spare bedroom has been more space than I know what to do with. The house itself, 2 stories, too many windows, a garden I keep out of habit more than necessity, often feels like it's wearing me rather than the other way around." So I said yes, without thinking twice. I've always had a soft spot for Lucas. Polite, attentive without being intrusive, the kind of man who notices when your mug is almost empty and quietly tops it off. The first Thursday he came, October rain had been pressing at the windows all day. The sky was low, the kind of gray that makes noon look like evening. The house smelled only of furniture polish and old paper, so I'd baked a cinnamon loaf just for the comfort of it. When he appeared at the front door, his jacket was beaded with rain. Damp hair curled at his collar like he'd just come in from a soccer game as a boy. He held a brown paper bag in his arms. "I brought these," he said, suddenly unsure. "Didn't know what you might need." Inside were late-season plums, cold and smooth against my palms. "I don't need anything," I told him. "But these are exactly right." We sat in the front room with the lamp switched on early against the dark day. Their yellow light pooled on the worn rug. Not thinking, I motioned to the armchair near the small table, and he sat down in what used to be Robert's seat. He didn't know. I didn't tell him. We talked about simple things. Jenna's new project at work, the leak in the corner of his ceiling, how the trees lining my street had gone from green to copper almost overnight. His voice was quiet and deliberate, as if he didn't want to disturb the stillness of the house. I found myself listening not only to the stories he told, but to what surrounded them, the comfortable pauses, the way he allowed silence to rest between us without scrambling to fill it. After that, Thursdays softened into a kind of hidden seam in my week. Around 6, I'd hear his car in the driveway. He often arrived with something small in his hands, a warm loaf from the bakery, a bundle of late dahlias, fresh eggs in a carton from a farmer's market I no longer visit myself. We cooked together, though neither of us made a fuss about it. Poached eggs simmered in tomato sauce, simple pasta tossed with kale I still grew out of habit. Soup built from whatever the fridge offered. He chopped vegetables without needing to be asked. His grip on the knife was steady and patient, the way Robert's had been when he used to stand where Lucas was now. I watched, recognized the motion, and kept that recognition folded quietly inside. One evening in November, just as the kettle began to rattle on the stove, the power snapped off. The house fell abruptly into a gray half-light. "Hold on," I said. "This happens more than it should." I moved through the familiar dark to the drawer where I keep candles, found a handful, and set them around the kitchen, one by the sink, one near the stove, another on the narrow windowsill. Lucas struck the matches. The thin flames wavered, then straightened, painting our faces in flickering gold. He rummaged in the pantry and unearthed an old battery radio I'd almost forgotten I owned. He tuned it carefully until a station came through, faint but clear, playing a bit of Bach that seemed oddly appropriate in the candle glow. We ate cold roast chicken and bread at the table as the music crept softly through the rooms. "I used to be afraid of this," he said after a while, "dark like this. When I was little, I'd lie awake listening for noises in the hallway, sure something was going to happen. I still get uneasy," I confessed. "Even now. Especially now, sometimes." He turned his head toward me. What I saw in his expression wasn't pity. It was something closer to recognition, as if I'd given name to a feeling he'd been carrying for years. Wax dripped slowly from the candle between us, forming a pale pool on the saucer. When the lights finally blinked back on with a gentle hum, we both squinted, surprised at how quickly we'd grown used to the softer world. He reached to help me extinguish the flames. Our hands met over the small box of matches, just a brief brush of fingers, a touch that lasted no longer than an inhale. But the warmth of that contact ran along my arm like a thin bright wire. And I realized, with an almost startled clarity, oh, this part of me is still alive. We didn't talk about it. Not then. Not ever, really. Winter came suddenly that year. The garden stiffened under frost, and I dragged the chairs in from the back porch, leaving only their impressions in the thin snow. Lucas began staying later. Sometimes he found a book I'd left on the table, poems, stories, and asked if he might read a few aloud. "Only if you don't mind," he'd say. "I'd like that." I always answered. He read with care, lingering over the commas, letting the lines breathe. I would sit with my mending, a loose button or a frayed cuff in my hands, and simply listen as his voice shaped the words into something bigger than the paper they came from. Once, halfway through a poem, he stopped. "Is this all right?" he asked. "I prefer it this way." I told him. My head can be crowded. It's good to hear the words came from somewhere outside it for a change. He gave me a small, almost shy smile, then continued. There were evenings when we hardly spoke at all. We'd sit at the kitchen table while the oven, set low, warmed the air. We shared a pot of chamomile tea, pouring from the same chipped blue teapot I'd had since before my son was born. Rain would tap steadily at the windows. Wind sighed around the eaves. I'd notice how the lamplight caught on the edge of his glasses, or the pale line of an old scar tracking across his left thumb, earned, he told me once, in a childhood mishap with a pocket knife. He noticed things too. When he saw me unconsciously massaging the ache in my wrist where the arthritis settles on cold days, he stood up, reached for the jar of salve from the highest shelf, warmed some between his hands, and passed it to me without comment. I never asked how he knew where I kept it. One Thursday in late December, he arrived as the first real snow of the season began to fall. Fat, slow flakes drifted past the porch light like soft white moths. He stood in the doorway, coat unbuttoned, watching the yard turn gently from brown to white. "I should probably head back before it gets worse," he said, but didn't sound particularly convinced. "You'll stay," I said. It wasn't a suggestion. The words came out simply like a fact. The roads would glaze over by nightfall, and there was no reason for him to risk them. He made a polite attempt to argue, then gave in. I put fresh sheets on the guest bed, the ones that smell faintly of line drying even though they haven't seen a clothesline in years. I shook an extra blanket over the foot of the mattress and left a lamp on low by the door. For dinner we had barley soup thick with carrots and celery, and later we sat in the living room in front of a fire I'd laid more from nostalgia than need. The logs were from the apple tree we'd pruned a few years back. When they caught, the flames burned sweet. Lucas knelt to add another log, then settled back in Robert's old chair. The fire cast honeyed light over his face, softening his features. Sparks climbed the chimney in tiny bright bursts. In that glow he began to talk, slowly at first, then with a kind of tired relief, about the marriage he had left behind. He didn't give me gossip or sharp edges. Those, he said, belonged to his former wife and weren't his to hand out. Instead, he described the feeling of it, the effort of bending himself to fit into a shape that never quite matched. The way unspoken things piled up between them until the silence felt like a third person living in the house. "I kept thinking," he said quietly, "that if I tried harder, I'd finally manage to be what I was supposed to be. And then I realized I was disappearing instead." The fire cracked, shifting its weight. "I thought I'd failed at something everyone else seemed able to do," he added. "Settle in, stay." I watched the patterns of light on the ceiling for a moment before answering. "I don't think that's failure," I said slowly. "Sometimes it's just the truth arriving later than we'd like it to." He studied me through the low flames. "You say it more gently than it felt," he said. "Maybe," I replied. "But gentleness doesn't make it less real." He nodded, turning that over like a stone in his mind. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the fire eventually sank into a deep red glow. When he finally stood to go up to bed, I went to the cedar chest at the top of the stairs and took out another blanket. As I draped it over the arm of his chair for the night, my fingers brushed his shoulder. He lifted his hand, not to grasp mine or pull it closer, but simply to rest the tips of his fingers lightly against the back of my hand, a touch that lasted exactly one breath and no more. No words passed between us, but the gesture carried its own clear language. "Thank you. I see you. You're not invisible. Long after he went upstairs, I could still feel that soft warmth along my skin. The next morning, the world outside was clean and bright, the kind of white that erases every flaw. We stood side by side at the kitchen window, coffee mugs cradled in our hands, watching small birds argue at the feeder. He left before the plows had fully finished clearing the street, driving slowly, headlights dimmed by the glare off the snow. I stood on the porch in my coat and wool socks, watching his car until it disappeared around the bend. That was the last Thursday before Christmas. He went north to spend the holidays with his parents. I went to my son Alex and Jenna's house, where the grandchildren turned the living room into a blizzard of wrapping paper and shrieks of delight. It was warm and wild and lovely, and yet in the middle of all that noise, I carried a small pocket of stillness inside me, a quiet warmth I didn't show to anyone. Like a smooth stone resting in the center of my palm, unseen but steady. He came back in January. The snow melted, then returned, then melted again the way it does when winter can't decide it's finished. Our Thursdays slipped back into place as if they had never paused. One evening at the very start of spring, when the air held that thin, hopeful softness and the days were just beginning to stretch, he arrived with a small clay pot in his hands. "I saw these and thought of your kitchen window," he said. Inside the pot, a cluster of violets bloomed, their petals a deep, almost improbable purple, leaves padded and dark. I set them on the sill above the sink where each morning the first light would reach them. As the weeks moved on, we talked less and understood more. I began to see that being truly known isn't always woven from big conversations. Sometimes it's in the easy way someone moves around your kitchen, or in the way they reach to close a window when they notice you've tucked your hands under your arms for warmth. Sometimes it's just the knowing that, after years of hearing only one set of footsteps and one heartbeat in a house, there is another human presence breathing quietly in the next room. In April, on a mild evening when the lilac buds were barely swelling and the soil smelled rich and cold, we walked together through the garden paths after supper. There wasn't much to admire yet, just patches of green promise pushing through last year's debris. By the old wooden bench beneath the dogwood, he stopped. "I signed a lease," he said. "A new place. Closer to the office. I'll be moving next month." I'd known, in some deeper part of myself, that this was always how it would go. This arrangement was never meant to be permanent, but hearing it spoken out loud placed a small, final period at the end of a sentence. I nodded. "I'm glad," I said. "It'll be good to have your own space again." He tried to say more, then gave up searching for the perfect phrasing. He began. "I know," I answered. We stood quietly as the light thinned around us. A robin called from the fence. Somewhere a neighbor's door shut. There was no ache, not exactly. Just a fullness, as if some empty place inside had been filled carefully. And now, even as it prepared to be emptied again, it remained changed by having been used. He turned to me. "Margaret," he said, my name sounding suddenly younger in his mouth. "Thank you. For all of it." I touched the fabric of his sleeve just above his wrist. The cotton was warm from his skin. "Thank you," I replied, "for letting me be more than just the person who makes the soup." We didn't hug. We didn't need to. The moment itself wrapped around us the way twilight wraps around a day that's almost finished, but not quite gone. The following week, his new apartment was ready earlier than he'd planned. Our last Thursday arrived sooner than either of us expected. That evening, he came to the door carrying a small object wrapped in brown paper. "I made this," he said, a little embarrassed. "They offered a woodworking class at the community center. I'm not very good, but here." Inside the paper was a simple wooden box, smooth and undecorated, the grain of the walnut catching the light as I turned it in my hands. It fit neatly in my palm. I lifted the lid. Inside, on a square of folded fabric, lay a single flat stone worn smooth by water. Gray, with a thin line of white running through the center like a stroke of paint. "For your pocket," he said quietly. "For days when the house feels too empty." I closed my fingers around the stone. It settled into my hand as if it had been waiting for that place all its life. After he drove away that night, taillights shrinking down the street, I remained in the driveway longer than there was any reason to. The neighborhood was still, porch lights soft behind curtains. Finally, I went back inside. I placed the stone on the kitchen windowsill beside the pot of violets, which had opened themselves into a cluster of small, heart-shaped petals. Thursdays are different again now. Sometimes I still bake something, cinnamon bread, or a small pan of brownies, out of habit more than need. I sit in the living room with a cup of tea and listen to the hall clock mark out the evening. The quiet has returned, but it is not the same quiet that lived here before. This silence feels wider, Less like absence and more like a room where something important once happened and left a gentle echo behind. I've stopped believing that aging means the heart folds itself away for good. It doesn't retire. It simply learns new forms. Some feelings don't blaze through you anymore. They arrive small and solid, like a pebble you can tuck into your fist, or like the memory of a brief touch on a winter's night that warms you long after the fire has gone out. I carry Lucas's stone in my pocket when I walk through the garden now. Occasionally, I take it out and hold it up to the sun. The thin white line through the middle catches the light like a quiet secret. More and more, the word that comes to me is simple grateful. Not greedy, not regretful, just thankful. Thankful to have been seen clearly for a time, not as Mom, or Grandma, or the widow in the yellow house, but as a whole person. Thankful that something inside me I had assumed was sleeping for good stirred, lifted its head, and blinked awake long enough to look another gentle soul in the eye. In May, the lilacs finally open, heavy and fragrant. I cut a few stems, trim them short, and place them in the wooden box, using it as a small vase on the kitchen table. Their scent rests in the air for days, drifting into the corners of the house. Some evenings, as the light fades, I sit on the front steps with a light shawl around my shoulders. The air smells of cut grass and someone's distant laundry, and sometimes, if the wind comes from the right direction, a hint of rain. I think of Lucas in his new place. Maybe he's reading, maybe he's listening to music, maybe he's just sitting in his own patch of lamplight, finally feeling at home inside his life. I don't wish for anything more than what we had. What we had was exactly the size it needed to be. Like the stone in my pocket, modest, smooth enough. And in the deep, easy quiet of my house, I can still feel it sometimes, that small, bright current running from my palm up my arm to my chest. A gentle reminder that I am still here, still capable of warmth, still sharing this world with another kind, complicated human being. That, I have learned, is more than enough.